So again, good afternoon, good evening and good morning in case there are international participants to this meeting. My name is Luisa Bravo. I'm the president of City Space Architecture, a non-profit organization based in Italy, and I'm glad to welcome you all to this first webinar of the webinar series celebrating public space that we are organizing in cooperation with the Eastern Mediterranean University based in Cyprus, and that I'm developing together with my colleague Sebnem Hoskara based in Cyprus. Okay, so again, good afternoon. Good evening and good morning in case there are international participants to this meeting. My name is Luisa Bravo. I'm the president of City Space Architecture, a non-profit organization based in Italy, and I'm glad to welcome you all to this first webinar of the webinar series celebrating public space that we are organizing in cooperation with the Eastern Mediterranean University based in Cyprus, and that I'm developing together with my colleague Sebnem Hoskara based in Cyprus. So as you can see, we designed this online initiative with the intention to discuss about the public space in regard of specific celebrations. So today, while we celebrate the International Women's Day, we are interested to discuss also about the role of women in public space, and throughout presentations from our speakers and this amazing panel, we will also describe international initiatives and opportunities for women to reclaim their rights and to break barriers of gender inequalities. So we were able to put together this panel of women that are already working on projects that are focusing on the role of women in public space. So I'm very happy that today we have also this opportunity to discuss with them about public space. Before I pass the word to my colleague Sebnem, I would like to give you some basic instructions regarding how to behave during this meeting. We decided to invite participants to a meeting rather than a webinar. So all of you can actually speak during the event, but we kindly ask you to wait for all the speakers to present and finish their presentations, because we are planning to have a long Q&A session at the end, about 20 or maybe 30 minutes. So in case you would like to interact during the session, during the presentation, you can always write your comments in the chat. I see already messages. Happy International Women's Day to all. But later you can, take the floor and, ask questions directly to our speakers or to us as moderators. So now, Sebnem, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Luisa. I would like to also wish all of you a happy International Women's Day. And I would like to thank our colleagues who are part of today's event. As my colleague has already mentioned, we are organizing this webinar series in collaboration with Eastern Mediterranean University, Urban Research and Development Center, and City Space Architecture. In order to celebrate public spaces under the scope of different international occasions. With these events, of all of which will have a specific focus in parallel with United Nations themes introduced for 2022. We aim to raise awareness of the values of public spaces and at the same time promoting sustainable development goals for better public spaces. Today's event is our first in the series to celebrate International Women's Day, which is celebrated every year in many countries around the world, as you already know. It's a day when women are recognized for their achievements without regard to divisions, whether national, ethnic, linguistic, cultural, economic, or political. Of course, advancing gender equality in the context of the climate crisis or disaster risk reduction is also one of the greatest global challenges in the 21st century. And we believe that public spaces are an important tool to advance gender equality within the cities. We believe that public space is or should be gender neutral. As urban planners, designers, we should not ignore the needs of women or any other genders in public spaces. We shouldn't make them exclusive, but instead inclusive. And we should make everyone feel safe and secure in public spaces. With these in mind, I would briefly like to introduce our panel, our very valuable colleagues from different parts of the world. And I would like to thank once more all four of them to accept our invitation for today's event. Our first speaker will be Chiara Martinuzzi, who is an architect and an urban designer at UN Habitat's Global Public Space Program since 2019. She provides technical assistance to UN Habitat's local implementation partners in Africa, Middle East, and Europe. Sebnem Ünsal, our second speaker, is an urban researcher with a focus on urban regeneration, policymaking, grassroots resistance, and rights to the city. She has completed her PhD thesis at the City University in London, Department of Sociology, and she has worked in several universities teaching and doing research in urban sociology. Our third speaker is Rosina Spenau, who is a design strategist and social entrepreneur running her own NGO, and she's working across Europe and beyond. She has got several hats, and she's using her innovation and design management skills across a variety of sectors, from education, equality, inclusion, women's issues, mental health, urban placemaking, and civic participation. And last but not the least, our Stephanie Weber. She is an urban being, as she put it in her bio. She's an ex-future architect and a firm believer of international cooperation. Her passion for cities has led her to live in 4 different continents. She has previously worked with the participatory slum upgrading program in the housing branch at the headquarters of UN Habitat in Nairobi, Kenya, and the International Relations Office in China, among other international experiences. Well, there is a lot to say about our panelists, but I think we would like to leave the word to our first speaker to start our discussions. Please, Chiara, the floor is yours, or the screen.
Thank you so much for the great introduction, and happy International Women's Day to everyone. I think for the sake of time, I'll just jump into it. And I think it's really nice for us to be here today because beside the International Women's Day for us is also the first anniversary of Her City Toolbox. Today we launched it exactly 1 year ago, and yeah, we're very, very excited of how it's coming along. And I'm gonna give you a quick presentation today. So Her City Toolbox is an initiative that has been started between the Global Manning and the UN Habitat. Sorry, I just realized I was far from my microphone. I hope you hear me better now. Anyway, Her City Toolbox is an initiative started between the Swedish think tank Global Manning that let's say deals with urban challenges, and UN Habitat, which is the United Nations Agency for Human Settlements. To make the long story short, let's give a bit of an introduction of what is the picture or the overall image of the states right now. We know that by 2050, 70% of world population will live in cities, and that this will bring enormous challenges in our societies, especially for when it comes to inequality. We believe, and research has shown that the most vulnerable groups will be the one that will be most affected by this change and about inequalities, the inequalities issues. Particularly one of those vulnerable groups will be young women in socioeconomically living in socioeconomical areas that perhaps are the more marginalized in our societies. We know the research has shown that the participation creates opportunities to improve those situations and give more opportunities to develop more inclusive, equal, and sustainable urban scenarios. Sorry. That is killing me. But there, on the other side, there's also a lack of knowledge in participatory tools and methodologies of how do we do it? How do we actually improve participation in urban development processes, that including those groups that are mostly marginalized? We aim that with this initiative, we aim to give our contribution to particularly the SDG 5 and the SDG 11, which are the SDG on gender equality and sustainable communities and cities, but we also see a lot of linkages with other SDGs, such as the SDG 3, 10, 16, 17, and in general, the localization of the entire 2030 agenda. Also having an understanding of what do we mean in gender gap when it comes to urban planning and design, and using digital tools and in general, the digital divide that is also has a gender component. We know that 60% of women feel unsafe in public space worldwide as an average. 40% of women compared to the number of men have access to internet, especially when it comes to less developed countries. And 26% of women compared to men own a mobile phone, again, in the least developed countries. And this showcase that women in general has more, let's say, have a deeper digital device than what is referred to men. Also, when it comes to decision making, we know that 23% of women covers a governmental position worldwide. And beside the public sphere, also the private sphere is still very threatened because 30% of women has experienced domestic violence at least once worldwide. So we still see that there's a lot of challenges that needs to be tackled. And I've been reading recently that if we keep this pace, probably by in 142 years, we will actually reach the gender gap. So I think we should start soon to take some actions. This is how it typically looks a city right now in those, especially where rapid urbanization is particularly challenges. We see that there's a lot of congestions, there's a lot of pollution, there's no space for public space, and more than, and particularly there's no space for safe public space, qualitative public spaces that improve social cohesion and safety for women and girls. So starting from this, we believe that we need to make a change, and that's how we started with trying to develop our vision. We believe that involving girls in urban development will make a change for the entire society and will create cities that are better for everyone, mostly because girls plan and design with a diversity of need in mind, and don't think only about what is the needs of the women and girls, but they also think about what's the need of the children, what's the need of their adults, elderly people, and disabled communities. So a much broader range of groups, and eventually benefited the entire society. We also know that participatory processes are key to improve and inform city planning that works for everyone. And finally, our vision is also like, if we let the cities that are rarely heard be the expert, eventually our cities and community will become more inclusive, equal, and sustainable. So in one sentence, what is the toolbox? Her City Toolbox promotes girls and young women participation in urban design and planning processes to create more sustainable and inclusive cities for all. The toolbox at the moment support urban developments from a girl perspective. It guides urban actors to implement projects with a step-by-step methodology. It provides an open and digital accessible platform for everyone, and it facilitates an ongoing dialogue between professionals and citizens. We have developed this toolbox jointly, as I said, between UN Habitat and Global Utmaning, the Swedish think tank. But the series of other stakeholders have been engaged throughout the process. First of all, of course, Vinnova, who's been our main donor and has financed the initiative, but also in collaboration with Block by Block Foundation, the White Architects, Swedish Union of Tenants, and MethodKit. Throughout the process, there's been quite a strong participation from a multi-stakeholder range of actors from public sector, private sector, research, civil society, and also citizen in itself that have been giving us input throughout the process to make the toolbox better. We kept this target as our main goal, let's say, to have an intersectional approach, because we believe that girls and women are a very diverse group of our society, and it's important to take in consideration all the different range and diverse need of this group specifically, because women are not only women, but they're also refugees and minority, they're children and youth, they're also people with disability, and they also are part of the LGBTQI+ community. So this is quite important for us to take into consideration while shaping the toolbox. A little bit to give you a timeline. We started in 2017 as the result of the Urban Girl movement that was launched by SIDA, the Swedish International Development Agency, with the purpose to map what are so far the methodologies and tools that has been developed by different partners to increase equality and inclusion in urban development. Then in 2018, with the first financing phase from Vinnova, the Swedish Innovation Agency, we have tried to put all these tools into a process and pilot them in Ficcia, this municipality in Sweden. This has allowed us to understand what are the tools that were quite interesting, what are the ones that maybe we needed to be improved. And eventually in 2019, with a second financing phase from Vinova and in close collaboration with Global Input Money, we started developing the toolbox, what is so far HerCity Toolbox, make these tools available for everyone globally. In 2020, in the light of COVID pandemic, we really realized that the toolbox needed to be digitalized as much as possible, because we really needed to accelerate inclusion in sustainable urban planning and design despite the current crisis. And so make sure that we could reach all these different stakeholders and all the different countries around the world that needs to really put gender equality as a first. So we actually started this process of developing a digital platform. In 2021, exactly 1 year ago, on the International Women's Day, HerCity Toolbox was launched together with 2,000 stakeholders, and this has been a great success. After that, we started a series of regional trainings, and we conducted 7 regional trainings in Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, Europe, North America, to kind of cover and build capacity as much as possible. And right now we are engaging with actually 12 city partnership projects to test the toolbox and try to also tailor it as much as possible based on the needs on the ground. In 2022, we count right now actually 880 users, and we are very proud of the success of the toolbox, and we are still continuing to support our actors in their different contexts, but also trying to develop new partnerships. Here is very quickly a snapshot of our ongoing partnership in Africa, Middle East, Latin America, and Europe, especially in Nairobi, Kenya, Johannesburg, South Africa, Beirut, Lebanon, Stockholm, Sweden, Lima, Peru, and Palestine in general. And we counted 125 projects, 850 registered users in the platform that covers 95 countries and 315 cities. This is quite nice because we see that the toolbox is actually quite widely spread and independently used. The toolbox, the way it's done is it describes a process that can be developed completely independently without our support. And we are directly engaging only in 12 partnership projects, but otherwise the other cities are completely independent. And here you have a snapshot of all the users around the world. So we see quite a lot of users in Europe that make us think that actually this toolbox doesn't only support the Global South, but we still have a great challenge to be addressed on gender issues in also the Global North. But also we see quite a lot of users in Latin America and India. When it comes to the diversity of user, we also have been trying to analyze who is actually interested in the toolbox. And we realized that it's quite nicely spread and divided between private sector, public sector, research, and civil society, probably with like a 27% in research, so slightly higher, but eventually the users, like the toolbox is useful for everyone. To go a little bit into details about how the process looks like, the HerCity Toolbox is divided in 3 main phases: assessment, design, and implementation. And it's organized in 9 blocks that helps you to co-design the city from a gender perspective. Each block has clear outcomes. Within each block, there are several activities that need to be completed. And to explain each activity, there are a series of very practical steps to complete. So in a way, it's very, very easy to follow and go through the entire process. Each step also make linkages within the digital toolbox, the digital tools that we have been mapping previously, and includes checklists, calendars, agendas, manual, boards, application, and visual services. And among some of the digital tools that we've been using, we can highlight Jamboard, Kobo Collect, MotoKit, Minecraft, SketchUp, etc. Most of our tools are actually open source, but we also make linkages to other tools that are not open source in case someone is interested to go even more in deep in specific aspect of the process. Very quickly, in a snapshot, assessment phase covers stakeholder mapping, citywide assessment of the public space network, and then goes into deeper into a site-specific assessment of one selected public space. Then we jump into the design phase, analyzing the challenges, then designing the ideas together with the participants, and then defining a recommendation for actions. Eventually, the implementation phase helps you to go through the action plans, so the actual technical, feasible proposal, and then close the process, sharing the result and following up in the implementation process. We believe that her city toolbox can generate a more safe, inclusive, and accessible public space cities where public space are very present and abundant and qualitative in our cities, and generate something that it could look like this. I do have a little tutorial, but for the sake of time, I'm gonna just put it in the chat so you can have a look and get a little bit more information about the toolbox. But right now our toolbox is available on our website, and we also have open a few pages such as Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and you can see the updates of the toolbox, but also the updates of our local projects. I stop there, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chiara. That's very interesting. I think maybe if we have time, we may see your tutorial at the very end. Now I would like to give the floor to Özlem Ünsal. Please join us with your presentation, Özlem. You are muted.
Now, is it visible to everyone? Yes?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you once again for inviting me to this wonderful gathering of wonderful women whom I'm meeting for the very first time. It's very exciting. As Sebnem also introduced me, I am an urban sociologist and researcher who is especially focused her research on the cases of state-led urban transformation in Turkey. So I'm a Cypriot who has just moved back to her home country, but my past 20 years or so was predominantly based in England and Turkey, where I did my research and engaged in a number of different sorts of academic activities. So what I wanted to do for today, first of all, I need to mention that my research does not per se focus on the relationship between women and urban space specifically, but as an urban researcher and an urban sociologist who has been looking very closely into diverse situations of urban transformation, it is inevitable that you start to notice certain particularities that start to, let's say, demonstrate a certain type of pattern in how things are being done and how women are systematically getting affected. It's, of course, impossible not to pay attention to these details. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience and my observations on the way in which women have been affected by the post-2000s urban transformation schemes that have been handled by central governments in Turkey. So as you can see in the introductory page, here is this is Istiklal Avenue that opens to one of the biggest main squares of Istanbul, that is Taksim Square. And this is a picture from the 8th of March demonstrations from 2019. You can see it looks pretty glamorous, it's pretty crowded, but it has not recently been as crowded and let's say glamorous as it looks in this picture for various reasons that I'm going to explain in the coming few minutes. So let's say, why is this not moving? I'm thinking. Oh, okay. I'll try to do it from here. Okay. So when I say that I've been focusing on the cases of state-led urban transformation in Turkey, what I mean by that is that what I've been witnessing, what we have all been witnessing, is the increasing and steady neoliberalization of urban space, as it is happening in many other cities of the world, and especially, let's say that these show more parallelities with what we call the global South. The cities of the global South, they predominantly have quite parallel experiences within these respects. And here you can see different snapshots from what is happening in Istanbul in the past 15 years, let's say. And when I say the increasing and steady neoliberalization of urban space, what I mean is the heightened effort to connect parts of the city that did not previously generate economic value, to connect these parts to the main circuits of capital accumulation. But what do I mean by these kinds of spaces? These include inner city poverty zones that are very centrally located, but do not generate as much income or economic value as they're expected. On top, you can see pictures from Sulukule, a former Roma neighborhood of 1,000 years history, which has been razed to ground to create a new housing settlement for private sale. Informal housing areas, also known as Gecekondu areas, similar of that would be shantytown areas or favelas of the South America. At the bottom, at the bottom of the page, you can see a picture from Ayazma neighborhood, which was known as one of the very well-known informal housing areas, which has also been recently raised in order for the Mass Housing Administration of Turkey to erect housing settlements for the low-income communities of the surrounding region. Another area that is included within those kinds of schemes is natural and historical heritage zones. In the second line, or let's say in the third picture, in the third line, you can see a bridge being constructed. This was located on the northernmost area of Istanbul, which is filled with water reserves for the city, and there have been resistance from different sorts of civil organizations in order to stop the construction of this bridge, because the water resources would become unable for use. But nevertheless, this bridge, which is called the third bridge, has been constructed nevertheless. Another area, other sorts of areas that are included within those kinds of schemes are state-owned land that swiftly gets privatized for the construction of shopping malls and other sorts of commercial areas. In the second line, you can see the land that previously belonged to the National Authority for Transport, which was privatized for the construction of the Zorlu shopping mall. So we can see a number of different kinds of lands like this that have been privatized with the different sorts of legal tools devised by the central government. And last but not the least, we see the public spaces. Here you can see an image from Taksim Square from 2013 when the Gezi demonstrations took place. I'm sure most of you have heard of these demonstrations, where different segments of the society gathered together in protest of different sorts of decisions that were taken by the central governments at the time. And we have seen days-long demonstrations taking place in this space. And Taksim Square has not been exempt from any of these developments. This is a picture from 2013, and here you can see the huge crowds facing towards what used to be the Atatürk Cultural Center. And here in the second image, we can see Taksim Square in 2021. There are some new elements that we can see. First of all, you're going to see the Taksim Mosque at the forefront, which is a very recent construct, a very new mosque on the main square. At the very end of the picture, you can see a building which resembles the Atatürk Cultural Center, but it's a new cultural center that is constructed on the area where the former Atatürk Cultural Center used to stand. And also you can see that the square is pretty much deserted, because as you can expect, any of the public spaces that are handled in this way round by state-led forces are extremely privatized and policed. And what I mean by policed and privatized is that they gain a much more an increasingly commercial aspect. And at the same time, any sort of movement that takes place within these kinds of spaces gets policed and regulated by all sorts of forces. Another public space that became highly controversial in the past 15 years was the Galata Port area, which is in Karaköy. It has a shoreline to the Bosphorus. It was very important because it was one of the few areas where civil people, citizens of the city, could have access to the Bosphorus and enjoy the water elements of the city. So there were huge contestations coming from different sorts of civil organizations, such as professional chambers, the Chamber of Architects, the Chamber of City Planners, environmental organizations, human rights organizations. And the main argument coming from these organizations was that these areas should not be privatized for the sake of profit, because these are going to come in the way for people to access their most fundamental rights, that is access to water. Recently, this project has been finalized, and the people's access to the water is, when you look at it, is not obstacled by any element except for economic engagement, because as you can expect, now the entire shoreline has been privatized. There are shops, there are shopping malls, and there are spaces that can only be entered in exchange of money. So the only thing you can do maybe is maybe to take a stroll, and maybe that's it. So the things that you can do along the shoreline are extremely limited compared to the past. So now I've mainly talked about public spaces in general and how they're being affected by these forces of privatization and urban transformation. But now I would like to turn my focus to public spaces that are created within new housing settlements and how women are particularly being affected by these new definitions and new design practices that come into being. So what I mean by public spaces within new housing settlements is pretty straightforward. As I mentioned at the start, there are certain poverty zones and informal housing areas that are demolished, and the populations and the residents living in these areas are transferred to newer areas where there are housing settlements erected by the Mass Housing Administration of Turkey, where people can either rent at cheaper rates or become house owners within longer payment terms. From what I explained, you can understand that there's no social housing policy as it is described in the context of Western countries. So there's no situation whereby people are going to settle in these kinds of areas for free or in return of other sorts of dynamics, let's say. So here we can see on top, we can see the Ayazma neighborhood, which was one of the oldest informal housing zones, informal housing areas in Istanbul, towards the western end of the city. And this area was raised for the sake of formalization of urban land. This is usually one of the main arguments that come into place by state authorities when there's a wish to transform a certain area. So to that end, what we have seen is the demolishment of Ayazma and the construction of the Bezirgan Bahçe housing settlements by the Mass Housing Administration of Turkey in 2012. So what happens, and this is another scene from a similar kind of housing settlement, this time in Bursa, again built by the Mass Housing Administration of Turkey for low-income communities of the bigger cities of Turkey. As I said, I've undertaken a number of ethnographic research, both in the inner city poverty zones that I explained earlier, and also in the informal housing areas of Istanbul. And when I looked at my findings and the findings of many other colleagues and researchers, I realized that there are certain commonalities that come to fore, and I'm going to talk about those. So here's another scene from the Doğanbey Toki settlements. The Mass Housing Administration of Turkey in Turkish is abbreviated as a Toki, so that's where the word Toki comes from. So as you can see, this is an extremely standardized space with no spaces of congregation. So what you usually see in these kinds of settlements is blocks and blocks of apartment buildings, whereby the residents of the former informal housing areas are automatically, let's say, transferred by the state authorities. So previously, we're talking about people living in a much more organic fashion, making their own decisions about where to settle and who to settle with. and them being transferred into these spaces through certain lists that are created by local governments. So there are no spaces of congregation per se as they are known to them previously. What I mean by that is, of course, you can see that there's a park and there are many other green spaces amongst these building blocks. But what happens is that congregation is not allowed in these green spaces and public spaces, because these are extremely policed areas where any sort of, let's say, gatherings are not allowed due to fears of protest or revolt towards the local government, etc. So any kind of group activity is not tolerated, and this is usually regulated by smaller scale, let's say, administrations that operate within these kinds of settlements. And what happens in these kinds of situations is that women who were previously used to spending time outside in their former neighborhoods start to congregate in their basements, in the basements of these buildings. And it becomes a very, very tough part of social life, because there are weddings and there are funerals taking place within these neighborhoods, as you can imagine. And previously, whereby people would be doing all these activities outside in the open, out in the open, now they're forced to take these practices indoors, and usually in the basements of these building blocks, which are not convenient for these kinds of purposes. Another element that comes into effect is alienation due to the extreme standardization of space. So I remember this one quote from one of the women living in Bezirgan, and she was an illiterate person who could not read. And she was saying that the only thing that differentiated one building from the other was numbering. And she was scared that she would not be able to find her way back if she ever went out. So this extreme standardization of space and following design principle along these lines creates an extremely alienating feeling towards one's living area. So when you go out, there's nothing that distinguishes your own living space from the living space of another person, and one block looks exactly like the other. So this uniformity creates a feeling on the part of especially literate women, and that makes them stop going out and making use of their open available spaces. Another feeling, sorry?
Zemoja, I think if you could wrap up for our next.
Yes, now I will do that, yes.
Please.
I've just come to the end. So the last but not least element is insecurity due to detachment from the city center. So as you can imagine, these settlements are in the peripheries of the city as we know it. So the public spaces within these settlements get, extremely, even more isolated as the night comes. So people women refrain from spending more time outside as the sun goes down, because they don't feel secure in these isolated areas. So what I tried to say was that these new housing settlements that promise modernization and formality in urban land actually contribute to very, very unwanted results for one's presence in the city. And participatory design practices grounded upon the needs of residents are not put into effect, as one can see. These are, pre-made decisions of the state authorities, and new settlements that aim to modernize, formalize urban space, thus do not serve the democratic demands of their residents, which I think is one of the most important problems that we observe in these areas. Thank you for your time, and sorry for taking too much of everyone's time.
No, thank you. The topic is so deep, we know, but we need to give a,
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
short picture of everything and then to leave time for discussion. So I would like to turn to Rosina, please, for her presentation.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to share the screen there, and I think now I should be able to do this. Bear with me one moment. Okay. Oops. Let's see. View slideshow. I always end up pressing presenter view when it's actually slideshow. So thank you for the invitation to today's first launch of Celebrating Public Space on this International Women's Day. So what I've decided to do is actually share with you a little bit of storytelling on my sort of journey of public space. As you can hear, I'm Scottish, been born in Glasgow, and I'm of South Asian origin. My parents immigrated to Pakistan from Pakistan to Scotland in 1958, so not long after the independence. And I've been living here in Belgium, in Brussels, for 21 years. So I've decided to just share a little bit of journey and images and storytelling from each of these three different countries and my experiences as a woman in public space. Now, growing up in Glasgow, which I stayed in until 2002, it had a very much a kind of industrial past, which was, I guess, a lot of regeneration as such. Not that I like to always use that word, but since it became European City of Culture back in 1990, and there became a kind of transformation and a new kind of narrative. It was a city I always felt safe in, actually, and obviously being in Glasgow and in Scotland, there's a lot of outdoor, it's easy access to countryside and easy access to open spaces. The top pictures there you see when I visited with family in open spaces and really encouraging this kind of, the playfulness, the openness, being in nature, in amongst being in the urban city in Glasgow, which is a population of just around 1 million people. And really it kind of changed a lot and became pedestrianized. It kind of had a strategy of really the retail zones becoming pedestrianized for shopping. So that was Glasgow for me. And also actually, if I just go back a little bit, you can see there on the bottom left, people make Glasgow. That's where I'd studied. And indeed, people do make Glasgow. It's very much a hospitable city, which, you know, obviously recently had the COP26 conference. Now I want to jump to the Global South, to a recent visit, actually 2019, when I went to Pakistan. And I've only been a handful of times, and each time it just leaves me in awe, actually, of the dynamic spaces, the colours, the vibrancy. It reminds me of the pictures that Chiara had there initially when it was looking at urban zones. It was an illustration, and I feel that some of the spaces in images of Pakistan or India really remind me of that. Now, these, it's informal economy is a big part of, obviously, we know of the global economy. It's nearly half of the world's global economy, and there's a lot of spaces that are taken up by traders, by market people coming, just trying to make a living. And as you can see, it's incredibly sort of vibrant, but a lot of these spaces, and certainly this one when I visited, it's predominantly men. Men are in these spaces. Men are selling, men are buying. The women don't tend to come. And I must admit, walking through these spaces, it did feel initially quite uncomfortable, and then it was fine. But it was a very yeah, it was an incredible experience to certainly walk through the space, to see, as I say, people just coming straight from the farms, coming to sell the vegetables, the fruit, and also just, as I said, predominantly men in the space. Other images, so looking at the city of Lahore, which is about a population of 11 million people, and it's the size of Belgium, actually, practically. And seeing how at different times of the day, how the different spaces are used and how women are using the spaces. You can see here, it's a kind of marketplace, it's shopping, it's dusk, it's in the sort of evening, and that's when a lot of the women come out to use the spaces. They're coming out shopping. There's even spaces, as you see there on the right, it's actually, you would call them, I guess, the dupattas, it's the shawls that women would wear, and they're hanging up there on the right, and they're overtaking the public space. Women are really dominating the space in the evening. It was quite incredible to see this, and to see how, you know, there's just this hustle and bustle of women active in this space. Oh yeah, I was meant to cover the faces here, but that's fine. But going to the villages, again, another experience in the public space, but also going out to the fields. Here, when I went back in 2002, women would not be going on their own out in public space. It was not the done thing. So I had encouraged a few women. I said, let's go out for a walk. Let's go into public space. Let's go into the land and, you know, just walk, not do anything specific. This was during, and again, during dusk and during sunset. And the women were saying, this is not the done thing. This is not something that we would normally do. And also seeing how this transition between village, town, city, and how women were overtaking public space in the city when it was in Lahore in the market space, but how in the public space, it was still a fear, still an unsafety, still not wishing to go out, still not the done thing. So again, for me, interesting experience in terms of culturally going to the roots and seeing how these different spaces are being used. Now, of course, again, we know that, you know, women certainly in South Asia, I think it's like 80% of them, as I said, work in this sort of informal economy, in non-agriculture, actually, in South Asia. So a lot of women have to go through public space and the sort of this feeling of insecurity that we know is very high. There's been a lot of publicity recently of cases highlighted by some famous performers, street performers who are women in Pakistan, highlighting the plight of women in public space and how there isn't that safety, especially when it came to performing in public space. And this difference between performing in public space in the West and how we would perform in the global South is just not the done thing. Again, walking through the city of Lahore, it was interesting to see, you know, girls and boys playing together, taking over the public space, just playing in the street. And then on the right, it was also interesting seeing a space that I seen again back in 2002 to now, where local residents and community had gathered together, and also with the diaspora, and to invest in creating what they would call a safe public space. But as you see, the public space is not fully accessible. It still has the railing around. And again, when I was there, it was very interesting to see how the women were using this space. It's also used for events, for weddings, for, you know, people just enjoying the space. So there's sort of, I guess, perception of safety. It still has to be guarded, even with a physical gate. Again, part of the storytelling then takes me to Brussels, where I've lived now for 21 years. And again, seeing how community has come together and what safety means for us. This is a local park actually in my municipality that community and citizens got together. We crowdfunded around 18,000 euro for refurbishing a local community cafe bar it was a building before, but we've made it into a cafe, just as a summer bar for 3 summers, and how this made me feel safe walking through the park, even though in previous times, actually one time I had actually been accosted and somebody tried to steal my phone. But the feeling of when there's activity through the public space and how I felt so much safer, even at nighttime when you see the vibrancy at nighttime. And also the space has been used, of course, for many activities and activating this together with participation, together with the community, you know, whether it was art in the space, whether it was creating a mobile library, also activating the pavilion, and also local NGOs, local organizations gathering together, making this space more accessible with this agora seating there. And again, this feeling that I would have when there's activity, when there's things going on in the park, I would feel safe. And also this aspect of inclusivity, which for me has been very important, that this activation of this space, certainly within this park, it's been inclusive, it's been really accessible for many people. We know that in Brussels, it's one of the most diverse cities in the world. I think more than 70% of the population come from a different background, a different origin. And so again, this feeling and this contrast of what I'd experienced in South Asia compared to here locally. And again, it's really how women have been using the space. Here, of course, it's women selling food, selling, you know, food from their own culture, really owning the space, taking the space. And also, as I said, these intergenerational projects bring sports, culture to the space. But also it made me think a lot about space overall. And this is again the picture from Lahore of how this feeling of security, this feeling of having coverage, this feeling of safety. And this was a space in the city centre of Lahore, actually in the historic part, in which again, many women, men gathering together in different spaces and feeling safe under this beautiful archways. This takes me to also, in another way, some of the participation that we've had with citizens. Now, here in Brussels, in the northwest side, we also have a municipality of Molenbeek. Now, my municipality, when it comes to certainly activating space, creating attractive space, as you've seen in the park, there's lots of activities, lots of people. But it came to a little bit of the previous presentation of what Özlem was saying when it comes to an area where there's a high immigrant population, there's poverty, there's inner city poverty, there's not that attractiveness. So we did this participation visual mapping and participatory mapping of looking at how many benches do we have, what are the green spaces, how many flower pots, how much greenery is there, how are the trees maintained, and a stark contrast between the municipality that it borders on, which is ours, compared to this large municipality where there's a high immigrant population. And I always find that incredibly sad, that how these disparities are very much existing here and now and today. It also brings me a little bit to think about community overall, and community there as a mother. For me, I also feel that it was important of, you know, to think about how my children use space. And there also as a mother, certainly I have a, you know, I can share an experience, a personal experience of having a child that has disabilities. And it came to accessibility and thinking about what children need, what do young girls also want in their public spaces. And we did some workshops where it was linking with creativity of the analog world, of using just, you know, physical painting, clay making, right through to the virtual 3D world of looking at how and what would children want if they were designing a space. We think about public space, which I certainly feel as when it comes to youth and teenagers, We are thinking more about boys. It's basketball, courts, it's football pitches. There's not really enough there for young girls. And that's something that also came up, certainly during the workshop that we did here with the Flemish Community Commission, where it was taking children from a different origin who were here visiting from, or actually seeking refuge from war-torn areas and zones, and bringing them together. And again, another thing that came up, and it reminded me a little bit of the Lahore idea of having coverage. It was they wanted to be safe, they wanted to have coverage. They were always putting these like umbrellas up that we're going to be in this space where we feel safe, safety being quite a big element. Thinking about women in public space, I'm very honoured that I'm part of a women's collective here in Brussels called Women 100. Last year, during obviously the pandemic period, we decided to highlight women in leadership and women in community, but diverse women, really being radically inclusive, and we wanted to take over public space. So we did an exhibition, a photography exhibition of 100 women, diverse women from across the 19 municipalities, working at local, very local grassroots community level to women working at the EU institutions, women that were homeless women. And again, as I say, the spectrum of the socioeconomic scale, diversity scale, ethnicity, race, bringing them together in front of the Brussels Stock Exchange, which was already a symbol of capitalism over 100 years ago when women were not allowed in that space. And we did this photography exhibition right in front of the bourse of the Brussels Stock Exchange, which was an incredibly proud moment that for 2 months we had this exhibition where we were really reclaiming public space. Here it was the big ad showing the 100 women that we also had on a screen on one of the buildings, which was a big advertising screen. And you see also at night time how people gathered, women gathered in this space. This was held, as I said, in July and June of it kicked off at the end of June, and it was July and August. We also decided to think of public space in different ways. How can we really promote that diversity? And of course, we also were lucky enough that the city supported us, and we were reclaiming public space. And I think it was 24 areas in Brussels of the bus shelters, and really showcasing the diversity and highlighting the exhibition that we were having. This also links nicely to an initiative that I had started during the pandemic period, which was initiated after a couple of high-profile murder cases, actually a couple of femicides. One in particular was Sarah Everard in the UK, who was murdered last year. It was just about a year ago, in fact, by a policeman walking through public space. And it encouraged me to start an initiative called Empowering Women in Public Space. And this was initiated because I myself used to be very active in sports and do karate and self-defense. And I connected with women from different regions. One was from South Asia, one was from Northern America, and one was from Europe. And we connected. Now, we know that women shouldn't have to change their behavior, but I certainly know that there's an element of empowerment when you're learning self-defense, when you're learning a sport. And I know it helped me in occasions when actually once I got attacked as a student. And we also collaborated with W100, where it was overtaking this public space and learning and teaching self-defense to women. So it was a very empowering experience. We also had in the bottom right there some book readings by an author, Sangeeta Shinti, who actually was a victim of violence herself and domestic violence. And she had written a book on different women in India and their experiences on violence and how they felt. So it was a very empowering experience, as you see here with our picture here with the self-defense, and you have a scale of some of the images of women behind. And as I said, it was very much a kind of call to action that the people we were collaborating with were doing. So in Bulgaria, where Laska was based, it was a call to action from local initiatives right through to really creating that awareness of how do we create those safe spaces. And also, as I said, it's the purpose to be incredibly inclusive. And I'm glad to say also, and we can see Luisa's logo there of City Space Architecture, we also, with Empowering Women in Public Spaces, had started a session of talks you know, to encourage the awareness, to engage with other women, and to bring more awareness to the topic and share the experiences globally, with Global South and Global North coming together. We also were lucky enough to do a session on empowering women in climate change at the Innovate for Cities conference that was co-organised by UN Habitat and the Global Covenant for Mayors for Climate Change. So it's initiatives that we'll be taking forward with creating further awareness and further sessions, and hopefully also being at the World Urban Forum. So these are some of my experiences of public space. And I think what really comes to the light for me is indeed this I think, contrast, Global South, Global North, the different cities of my background, how women feel in those different spaces and what's happening. And overall, of course, we know globally, we know the statistics, we know we need to do so much more. We know we need more female mayors. I think in Europe, we only have 10% of women that are female mayors. And we know that there's more empathetic leadership, certainly when it comes to female leadership. So thank you for listening and listening to my experience and my storytelling.
Thank you, Rosina. Thank you. I think bringing together experiences of different cultures is a very interesting topic too. I hope we will have enough time to maybe talk about these. And now our last speaker is Stephanie Weber to give her talk. Please, Stephanie.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. You can see me. The most sad sentences within the last 2 years. First of all, thank you very much, Eastern Mediterranean University, the URDC team, and of course, City Space Architecture for having me here today with you. I'm Stephanie Weber. I work with Urbact. I won't spend much time explaining you to guys what's Urbact about. Otherwise, I would spend definitely more than my designated 10 minutes of speech. What I will tell you is that Urbact is a bottom-up European territorial cooperation program, which among very different types of activities, we gather knowledge in order to mainstream it. We do have a Gender Equal Cities initiative, which you can see right there in our in my presentation. And the idea of this project, which comprehends different events, policy recommendations, reports, and capacity building, kind of in the same light of what Chiara was explaining on the toolkits. We do have different activities of the kind, but the most important thing is that we point out where the improvements can be made in municipalities and communities all over the European footprint. We like to identify good practices, tell stories from different places, perhaps not as beautifully as Rosina has done. She took us, but we do like to gather the content from the different cities that drive transformative change towards gender equality, and which we can actually try to transpire and inspire one initiative to other cities. We have, for instance, partnered up with the CMR. For those of you who are not aware, CMR is the Council of European Municipalities and Regions. And with them, we have put together 10 key basic actions to kickstart gender equality. As you can see, the very first step, it is to sign the European Charter for Equality for Women. We tend to talk a lot about the mandates, the SDGs specific, but I think it's important to draw attention to this specific document, which last year has celebrated its 15th birthday, and which as today has 1,860 signatories from 36 European countries. So I think it's important to acknowledge this political level and dimension and how it can actually fit within other activities. That being said, regardless of the fact that we have put, for instance, these 10 beautiful actions to kickstart gender equality, none of our countries or beneficiary countries can yet say that or claim that the gender equality has been fully achieved or that they have closed the gap. And the concept itself for gender equality, it's constantly evolving. Nowadays, we kind of hear gender sensitive against gender responsiveness, or even the more extreme gender transformative aspect. So we're constantly driving new research and ongoing collaboration with cities, which I think it becomes also very clear in this panel, hearing from each one and every one of us. I think this is an example, exquisite example. In light of telling stories and bringing to light good cases, I don't like the best case scenario, but the good practices, I will do a quick Pecha exercise, which is one photo, one quick story, so you guys can grasp and had a little bit of a glimpse of what we do with gender equal cities, European cities, and the public space sphere of work. So without further ado, I'll go to the first image. This is a photo, not a high quality one. I'm sorry, apologies again. Didn't live up to Rosina's beautiful pictures taken by herself, probably even. This is a photo from Umeå. It is a city up in the north of Sweden. And when I say up in the north, really up in the north. And by October time, it has already a lot of heavy snow coming. And this is the image about like half of the year, what you see here. Not my kind of place. I like warm, cool places, not snowy. But in any case, in order to cope with this weather, it's obliged to every day do the snow clearance, meaning that this includes, of course, the sidewalks, but also the pavements, the roads. They have this adapted machine car that goes past every morning on each one of those places in order to clean the streets. And usually they used to start it with the main road where the cars used to pass. But nevertheless, they have started some kind of like data collection, and they have come to the conclusion that men were more likely to do single journeys throughout the day, meaning that they would take their car, get it from the parking from home, go to work, park at their office, and then they would only go back home. Whereas women, since they would be more keen and willing to have multiple journeys throughout the day, might as be because of work as well for daycare duties, they would be more compelled and more bound to take multiple transports. This means the bus, but in the case of Umeå, and hats off to the Umean ladies, because to me it's really cold, they take their bikes. So looking at this picture, they realized that women were leaving home earlier than men, and by bike, not by car. And one of the main challenges they had when they were leaving home, it is that it had a lot of snow on the cycling lanes by the time they left home. So it is one of those simple little things that just change the actions. They just change the schedule. Instead of starting with the roads for cars and the pavement, the clearancy machines and equipments start their work early in the morning with the cycling lanes. It doesn't mean that they are not going to clean the rest of the streets and so on, but it just means like a small change in the schedule that has such a big impact in women's life. And this data has been proven to be correct, accurate, and the feedback that the municipality has got, it was very positive. So kudos to Umeå and their initiative. Also on the topic of transportation, I wanted to bring to light the case of Paris. Back in 2017, the Thomson Reuters Foundation, they named Paris as the most dangerous megacity for women in Europe. This is like huge, I mean. And of course, there were many complaints that were being transpired in terms of public harassment and sexual harassment in public transportation. So this has pushed the municipality to launch this campaign, which you can see it's quite visual, to try to put people and passengers on the public transportation on the shoes of the woman, so they could get a grasp of a bit of conscience, although, of course, this is just a small effort. And this was throughout the year of 2019, all over all the metro stations in Paris. And I know that this might seem like a small step, but it is the acknowledgement from the local authorities to the issue. And this has for sure streamed other actions. So for instance, following up this municipal campaign, the mayor office has sponsored a helpline with geolocalization services to report harassment and for victims to seek assistance. So it is once again all those things that looks like a little push, but that can make the whole difference. And it's worth mentioning that later in that same year, there was a national bill that was approved. So sexual harassment in public transportation could mean people getting fined on spot, which was completely a novelty. You didn't have a kind of like an instrument of the kind to complain and get right away action. So those are all actions that are somehow building momentum, and we cannot say that they are not connected. They do have a ripple effect within each other. Also another French case, it is the city of Trappes, which is not so far away from Paris. And they have started redesigning playgrounds. I know looking at the picture, you just see this purple floor. What is that all about? Well, there was, once again, coming up from a willingness from the public authorities. The city has invested in redesigning the playgrounds in order to deconstruct gender stereotypes. And when we're talking about the gender stereotypes, we're not only talking about the colors, we're also talking about the type of toys that were put in place. And we're also, once again, talking about the data, because they started collecting data on how people used to, well, mainly kids, how they used to use the playgrounds. And one of the things that they have realized, it was that from a certain age on, young girls were less compelled and less comfortable to use playgrounds. They would seek gym places that were closed and so on, which could be in one hand related to security issues and a background story of our heads, as well as how they wouldn't be on the center of the playground. Usually would be one of the things that they noticed within their research. It was that it was always a group of young boys in the center and that the girls would be kind of in the corners. So this also has been taken into account when they designed the type of playgrounds, in doing some kind of a decentralized scheme where you didn't have like one single spot. So once again, small step that can be reproduced elsewhere, and it is clear that it has many benefits. And I'm regretting because I actually had another case in France that I thought to myself, I already put 2 French cases, I'm not going to talk about it. But after hearing from Ojlen and the experience on housing particularly, I wanted to draw attention to one city in the north of Paris, which is called Villers-les-Belles, which is a city that they have started a whole new program on social housing, developed it to women. After, once again, for research and data, they realized that single mothers were more likely to live in kitchenettes, I mean studios, one single room apartments, knowing that they have kids, how to deal with that. So within the newest social dwelling development project they had, they made sure to include some kind of criteria to get women who were single mothers with apartments that had at least 2 bedrooms. And they also had this whole scheme, which did not only concern the individual dwellings, but the whole housing scheme. So you would have common laundry spaces, common garden, well-lit open spaces. So it is an example of how, yes, indeed, there is an issue. We talk about adequate, affordable housing, but is this housing fit for women after all? So I think this is a very valid point, and I completely solidarize with your presentation there and what happened in Istanbul. Parentheses closed because I didn't actually have a proper Pecha Kucha image for this example. Let's move to Madrid. The city of Madrid, following an unfortunate accident, sexual harassment back in 2016, which was attributed to a group called Wolfpack Group La Manada. The city of Madrid has started taking consistently actions to prevent sexual harassment, especially things that would be too many men with single women out there. And whenever it comes to public gatherings, festivals of different kinds, neighborhood festivities, and so on, they started implementing the construction of what they call purple stands. So they were like zones that only women would be welcome, and it would be a safe space, in the sense that if I'm in a festival and I don't find at any given point safe, I can go there, and that would be a safe spot for me to seek assistance, talk to people. And it's also more or less a whole campaign. Once again, it relies a lot on communication aspects. We're talking about raising awareness. You have like purple stands a little bit all over the place. Of course, that creates a buzz and also draws attention to the political aspect of it. And last but not least, I hope I'm respecting my 10 minutes mark. This is perhaps not the most beautiful image we got here. Yeah, Chiara, I'm so jealous in a good sense from the beautiful images that you presented of the ideal cities and so on. Such a beautiful thing to see, to do this visualization exercise, to look and say, this is the city where I would like to live. This is a less visual appealing map, but it comes from the city of Poznan in Poland. When they were doing some urban planning restructurations and so on, it has come to the local municipality attention that in the 500 cities that they had in the 500 streets they had it within the city, only about 30 had like names of women. And when they had like streets that had the name of woman, it was usually saints, queens, or handmaids. And as we know, who and what we represented in public spaces, and to me that's where the biggest strength when we talk about public spaces and the public sphere is that this sends out a big message. It tells to the whole population what are the values that are being put into place and carried on in this specific moment in time. And following up this discovery, there was a bottom-up strategy and an initiative that has gladly achieved 26 new streets to either change their names, or the ones that were being rebuilt, to acknowledge and draw attention to female writers, female artists, and tell a bit of like the her story side of things, not just the queen's sense and so on. When I said that Urbact does many things, among them share and trying to mainstream these good practices and these good stories, we also fund projects of cities. It's never just one city. We're talking about a network of cities. So it's from 5 to 12 cities that either have a common challenge or that have a political will that they also share. And they come together to, depending on the time of the project and the methodology that is designed for it, they come together with implementation of some projects, initiatives. In some other cases, they have also strategic action plans that are built all together, co-constructed, if I may. And I would like just to draw attention to the gender landscape, which I started my presentation with the city of Umeå in Sweden. And they are actually leading these cities of this network of cities, sorry, this network of cities called Gender Landscape. They have an upcoming event coming up later this year in June. The registrations will be open from late March on. So I'm just drawing attention, just planting the seed. I can share with you guys the link on the chat so you can look at it. And of course, we are a big program with different kind of work streams and initiatives. And at program level, the work of Gender Equal Cities is never over. And we have a couple of things coming up this year that I'll just briefly share with you. We have a capacity building module on procurement and gender responsive procurement coming up a little bit later this year. We also had the report, which I share some of these stories. I can show you the cover now here, which we're doing a new edition with new stories and so on, because a lot has changed ever since 2019 when we first published this. It suffices to just look at the news, the most recent elections in Netherlands, and how there are more now than ever female on public positions in Netherlands, not in the rest of Europe or the world, but it's a place to start. So I kindly invite you to follow us so you can stay tuned for new findings and upcoming activities on Gender Equal Cities. And with that being said, I hope I respect the 10 minutes mark, kind of, and I hand the floor back to Luisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you to all the speakers. I think you all presented initiatives, reflections, and actions, activism, and with this willingness actually to put women at center stage in the urban discussion, but especially when coming to public space design, management, implementation, upgrade, transformation, and whatever it is needed to improve quality of life for all, but with a clear focus on women. And, you know, because many says that if you design for women, you design also for children somehow, and you design also in a more broad approach that is a caring approach, which is what women are supposed to do, to care, you know, about other members of the family. So caring is also something very important when we talk about use, appropriation, and transformation of urban contexts, cities, and public spaces. But I think we are a bit late. Actually, we were expected to finish after 1 hour and a half, but we didn't want to stop speakers while presenting, because we wanted to give enough time to them to, you know, to present their work and research and initiatives. But we still have time if you don't have to leave. I'm talking now to participants and to our speakers as well. So we can start a Q&A session if there is any question from the audience, or maybe I could ask something. Is there any questions from the audience?
Or comments maybe?
Anyone? You can write a question in the chat box, or you can just take the floor and ask. You know, breaking the ice is always very, very difficult.
I have a very quick question while waiting for the
Yes.
other. Can the Her City toolbox be used for educative purposes?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Actually, right now we are piloting an academic course about Her City in Chania Technical University of Crete. And we actually have done, it's going to be separated in 2 semesters. The first semester has been already concluded, and we reached, let's say, half of the process. And then in the second semester, we will conclude the process. But the idea of the academic course is really to teach to university students a series of tools and digital tools for public space development, and it's what I really like about the academic course is that the students in itself gain a very diverse typology of skills, from GIS GIS softwares, open source smartphone applications such as Kobo Collect that helps to use questionnaires and gather data, Minecraft, which we use it for co-design in public space, and a series of other activities. And it's been quite successful this first semester, and we're quite excited to start just now the second, and we will share soon also the result of this initiative. But also in general, I think the toolbox in itself really applies to also others types of education, not necessarily technical, but also the principle that comes out of the toolbox can be also applied to lower education or a PhD candidate, etc. So yeah, I think there's been quite a lot of application also in the education.
Thank you.
And Chiara, is the toolbox set to evolve? Like, is it an ever-growing set of tools, or?
Yeah, we have gathered so far, we mapped so far the tools that we found, but within a year I think we add other 6 tools in the smartphone in the platform. We do again, like we draw the process, let's say, prioritizing the open source tools and the free of access tools. So let's say that we kind of like, you can see in the contents of the platform that we prioritize specific approach, but then we always try to make linkages with other applications, such as a really successful tools that we've been now like exploring is Inhabit Place, which is a smartphone application that has been developed by this Australian company that really helps you to go through the site-specific assessment of a public space and really gather and then interpret the data in one click. And it's really, really interesting. That is like a purchasable service. It's not open source, but and we're trying to also make linkages to other opportunities so that it can be a toolbox interest. I mean, it could be applied in different contexts and capacity, or let's say resource opportunities. So yeah, if you have any tools that you would like to pitch us, we are really, really happy to make linkages and integrate them.
Can I ask a question, please? I wanted to ask Özlem a question with regards to the wonderful research that you shared. On the research to do with those kind of low income areas, were you able to go and delve deeper at all into the demographics of the population and how many, like, you know, are foreign origin or immigrants or men versus women? Were you able to go in that deep?
Well, of course, that's one of the first things that you want to do as a researcher, because you want to have some sort of a set of reference to be able to understand the bigger picture within the area that you're dealing with. But what is very, very challenging in the case of Turkey is that it's very, very difficult to get numbers. And it's very, very difficult to get consistent numbers. So, for example, you get a certain set of numbers from the local government, and then you get a number from the ministry, and then from the statistics department, and they just don't match. So you always approach it as matters of approximation. So I think it's very, very difficult to make any, to base any sort of an evaluation on the grounds of numbers purely. But of course, what you see from the numbers and what you see on the ground can sometimes match themselves, and you get an idea. For example, I mean, if you look at the numbers, the number of, the majority of women seem to be, you know, housewives. But when you go on the ground, you see that they're engaged in, you know, many different ranks of informal economy. They go and, you know, wash the dishes at a nearby restaurant. They go and do cleaning work, or they do a manual job for a, you know, textile workshop nearby, but they do it at home because they have small kids. So it's very, very difficult to base any sort of argument, you know, on numbers. And it's very difficult to work when you're in that kind of a situations, because I was particularly, my focus was on the neighborhood movements that were resisting against these kinds of transformative projects. And it's very important to understand the number of tenants, the number of occupiers, and the number of, you know, property owners. And it's just, you know, at the start, I felt very, very demoralized. I thought, you know, like, this is not going to take me anywhere if I just try to get official numbers, because there is none you know, when it comes to the consistency of it. But, you know, what you see on the ground is usually much more telling about the realities of that space.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you, because I think this session was able to put together, you know, research, projects, actions, outcomes, ongoing tools, and the development process also that is leading to strategies aimed at including women in the making of cities and public spaces. So I thank you again, all the speakers, for joining today and for the time they spent together with us. If there is no question from the audience, maybe we can close this webinar here. Sebnem, would you like to say something?
Yes, I think it is becoming late for everyone, end of the day. So I would also like to thank you for all the presenters and everyone who joined our session. And we just hope to see you again in our upcoming events. Please follow us.
Yes, the next event will be on Earth Day, 22nd of April. So it will be another celebration for public space. So hope to see you soon here or somewhere else with City Space Architecture and the Eastern Mediterranean University. Thanks a lot. Thanks to the speakers again.